Today in the Daily Dose, the American Industrial Revolution. After America gained her independence from Great Britain, the Founding Fathers not only tolerated the theft of intellectual properties from the British, but actively encouraged it, leading Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton to profess that the development of a strong manufacturing base was critical for the survival of a largely agrarian nation, leading Hamilton to advocate in his 1791 Report on Manufactures to reward any persons bringing improvements and secrets of extraordinary value into the country. George Washington also advocated intellectual piracy when he wrote in a 1789 letter to Thomas Jefferson that the introduction of the late improved machines to abridge labor must be of utmost infinite consequence to America. Thanks to Great Britain's advances during the First Industrial Revolution beginning in the 1760s, many Americans and Brits alike were eager to illicitly steal mechanical inventions from the British, including Boston merchant Francis Cabot Lowell, when he pirated plans for Edmund Cartwright's power loom in an effort to jumpstart an industrial revolution in America. Others, like Thomas Atwood Digges, prowled the industrialized regions of Great Britain in the late 18th and early 19th centuries in search of both innovative technologies and the skilled workers who could operate and maintain a given machine, leading the British government to ban the export of textile machines and the emigration of textile workers who operated them. Another early IP thief was English-born cotton mill supervisor Samuel Slater, who posed as a simple yeoman farmhand and set sail for America in 1789. Thanks to his astute memory, Slater was able to reproduce the details of his old employer Richard Arkwright's patented spinning frame, establishing the young nation's first water-powered textile mill in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, which soon made him an exceedingly wealthy man. Dubbed the father of American manufacturers by President Andrew Jackson, the British, for their part, had a far less flattering nickname for the thief, Slater the Traitor. The wholesale theft of European IP only intensified under the Patent Act of 1793, where the United States granted patents to Americans who had pirated technologies from other countries, at the same time barring foreign inventors from receiving patent protection of their own, making the young nation the world's legal playground for industrial pirates, with full legal immunity from prosecution in American courts. While IP thievery from Europe was rampant at the turn of the 19th century, homegrown American inventors contributed greatly to America's eventual economic dominance, such as Eli Whitney's 1793 invention of the cotton gin, which revolutionized the nation's cotton industry while strengthening the institution of slavery in the cotton-producing South. In one of the most stunning turning points in American history, following the end of the Civil War, the last 3 decades of the 19th century saw the nation transform from a rural agrarian republic into an urbanized industrial state. Frontiers had largely vanished in the face of persistent westward expansion, while factories and steel mills began to dot the landscape, fueled by the steady arrival of immigrant labor flowing in through Ellis Island. In 1870, America had been a geographically isolated nation since its inception, yet during the last 3 decades of the 19th century, Americans now occupied a much larger portion of the country's land than during the previous 3 centuries, thanks to the saturation of railways, first throughout the eastern half of the nation, until Congress approved funding for a Transcontinental Railroad in 1850. Construction was delayed due to disputes concerning where the train should run, from a northern terminus or a southern one. But after the Confederacy seceded from the Union in 1861, Northern lawmakers quickly settled on a central route across the nation. Shortly thereafter, Congress authorized the Central Pacific Railroad to commence laying tracks east from Sacramento, while the Union Pacific Railroad began constructing tracks west from Omaha. After a 6-year struggle and nearly 21 million sledgehammer swings since President Lincoln authorized the creation of a cross-country railroad, by early 1869, with both companies only miles apart from each other, newly seated President Ulysses S. Grant threatened to withhold federal funding until the two companies agreed upon a meeting point. The two companies chose Promontory Summit just north of Salt Lake City, some 690 track miles east of Sacramento and 1,086 miles west of Omaha. And on May the 10th, after repeated delays, a crowd of workers and dignitaries witnessed the Golden Spike Ceremony, as it became known, which constituted the final spike that connected the two companies' tracks. A gift from David Hughes, a San Francisco contractor and friend of Big Four member Leland Stanford. Stanford took the first swing at the spike, but when he hit the tie instead, construction manager Thomas Durant missed a second attempt, most likely due to his raging hangover following a celebratory party the night before. A railroad worker finally drove the spike at 12:47 p.m., whereupon a telegram went out to President Grant and news outlets around the country. Soon replaced by a conventional iron spike, the Golden Spike is now part of a collection at Stanford University, which was founded in 1885 by Leland and his wife Jane. Considered one of the grandest accomplishments in world history, the country went wild after the news broke, firing off more cannons in celebration than were fired during the Battle of Gettysburg. Prior to its completion, a cross-country journey could take up to 6 months and thousands of dollars to travel from New York to San Francisco. But with the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, the journey now took a mere week at a cost of a couple of $100, all in the safety of a railway car, opening up the American West to a less rugged diaspora of Americans. Connecting the two American coasts also opened a floodgate of exported Western resources into Eastern markets, at the same time accelerating conflicts between Native Americans and a flood of new settlers who now had easy access to the American West. The economic consequence of America's fast-expanding railroad network proved to be an elemental catalyst for the nation's emerging industrialization, growing from 57,000 miles of railroad track in 1870 to 167,000 miles by 1890, while innovations such as air brakes and sleeping cars made rail travel smoother, safer, and more comfortable than any other means of transportation. Like falling dominoes in a row, when steam engine trains switched from wood to coal, the demand for coal tripled in less than a decade. And when rails and modern rail cars moved from iron to steel, the modern steel industry was duly born. Ancillary industries also emerged from the nation's growing rail industry, most notably Gustav Swift's development of the refrigerated freight car, which in turn birthed the meatpacking industry. Industries such as grain and lumber also flourished thanks to the railway industry. Yet the most dramatic impact on the Industrial Revolution in America occurred in 1859, when two inventors, working independent of one another, Kentuckian William Kelly and Englishman Henry Bessemer, discovered a way to inject air into molten iron, burning off enough carbon to render steel, which was a much stronger end material and a much cheaper refining process than previous methods of steel manufacturing. To quantify the impact and rise of the American steel industry, some 77,000 tons had been produced domestically in 1870, while by 1900, that amount had skyrocketed to 11.4 million tons a year. Roughly spanning from the 1869 completion of the first Transcontinental Railroad to the early 1900s, the Gilded Age was a period in American history marked by rapid industrialization and economic growth, political corruption, and extreme social inequality, as migrants from both Europe and rural America flocked to increasingly overcrowded cities in search of employment and opportunity. Taking its name from Mark Twain and Charles Dudley Warner's 1873 novel, The Gilded Age, A Tale of Today, which satirized the greed-inspired superficiality of the period. The Gilded Age was driven by technological advances, industrialization, and a rapid increase in infrastructure, led by industrialists such as carmaker Henry Ford, steel magnate Andrew Carnegie, oil titan John D. Rockefeller, shipping and rail tycoon Cornelius Vanderbilt, and financier J.P. Morgan. While the early inventions of the American Industrial Revolution were stolen by American entrepreneurs against European patent holders, native-born inventors came of age during the same time period, witnessing the issuance of less than 1,000 annual patents just before the Civil War, to an annual registration rate of 25,000 patents by 1890. Inventions like the typewriter, adding machine, and cash register sped up the growth of American businesses, while inventions like George Eastman's Brownie camera, the elevator, and Alexander Graham Bell's telephone marked new heights in American ingenuity. Reigning supreme among American inventors, however, was Thomas Alva Edison, whose many inventions include the phonograph, the mimeograph and dictaphone, improved film projectors, storage batteries, and the motion picture camera. And while Edison didn't actually invent the first light bulb, his work to refine the use of long-lasting filaments made light bulbs practical in everyday use. Along with his team of scientists at his Menlo Park, New Jersey research lab, Edison is credited with producing a minor invention every 10 days and a major invention every 6 months, while over the course of his lifetime, Edison was granted a staggering 1,093 patents. As the American population more than doubled in size from 1860 to 1890, American farmers rose to the challenge during the Industrial Revolution, thanks to labor-saving steam and gas-powered tractors, reapers, and plows, enabling a single farmer to produce enough food to feed 5 people in 1850 to 15 people by 1890. Overproduction led to a glut of produce on the world market that same year, leading to inevitable price reductions that strained farmers' ability to make a profit. Exorbitant shipping rates further impacted American farmers, leading to the failure of some 80% of all Homestead Act farmers by 1900. The American Industrial Revolution marked not only the changing face of American industry, but also the changing face of America itself. For as mills and factories sprang up across the American landscape, vast cities grew up around them, beckoning rural workers from the American countryside while fueling wave after wave of immigrants from Eastern, Southern, and Western Europe. With nearly 400,000 annual immigrant arrivals in 1870, that number would double by 1882, which in turn witnessed a growth in urban centers from 6 million lives in 1860 to over 44 million in 1910. Between 1870 to 1890, the population of Minneapolis grew from 13,000 to 165,000, Denver from 4,700 to 107,000, while New York topped out at 2 million lives. As domestic and foreign immigrants flocked to urban areas, cities found themselves stressed by overcrowding, while racial, cultural, and ethnic tensions led to bitter conflicts in densely packed cities. Housing, water, and other critical services such as sanitation, roads, and bridges were quickly made inadequate, while garbage collection efforts, policing, and fire protection could not meet the needs of the fast-rising populations of city dwellers. Journalist H.L. Mencken described the stench of 1880s Baltimore like a billion polecats, while filth diseases like cholera, typhus, and typhoid quickly overwhelmed city hospitals and public health departments. While robber baron industrialists lived in opulent excess, working-class Americans faced long hours, low wages, and oftentimes dangerous working conditions, leading to a rising sense of social and economic inequality rampant during the Industrial Revolution in America, which would ultimately lead to the Progressive Era reforms of the 1890s to the 1920s. As cities like New York, Chicago, and Pittsburgh swelled with European and rural American immigrants in search of employment, competition for jobs further emboldened industrialists to keep wages as low as possible. While the average adult worker survived on subsistence-level wages, child laborers were paid even less, leading industrialists to employ more children in their factories and mills, with the added benefit that children generally lack the ability to unionize. By the mid-19th century, educational reformers began a concerted pushback against child labor practices, impressing upon the American public that proper education was a dire necessity if the nation was to prosper as a whole. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Progressive-era reformers made the end of child labor an important part of their cause, and after the National Child Labor Committee organized in 1904, reformers employed an array of tactics to increase public awareness regarding the filthy, oftentimes hazardous conditions experienced by child laborers, including investigations by experts, the use of photography to spark public outrage, persuasive congressional lobbying campaigns, and mass mailings to the public at large. A constitutional amendment was passed by Congress in 1924. However, pushback, particularly from southern states, killed any chance for ratification. The end finally came when the Great Depression left thousands of adult Americans without jobs, leading to FDR's sweeping New Deal reforms, which in effect removed children from the workforce. Unfair wages and harsh working conditions during the Industrial Revolution quite naturally led to an era of rising tensions between robber barons and workers, leading to the birth of organizations such as the Knights of Labor and the American Federation of Labor, or AFL, which sought to increase pay, improve working conditions, and establish a culture of workers' rights in a given industry. Rising tensions between labor and industry also led to some early and historic labor conflicts during the Industrial Revolution, including the Haymarket Riot of 1886, the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, the Homestead Strike of 1892, and the Pullman Strike of 1894. Besides the human toll, the Industrial Revolution in America also severely upset the balance between man and nature, at a time when waste from factories was dumped haphazardly into lakes, rivers, and streams, while pollution from factories and combustion engines had an adverse impact on the atmosphere. By 1870, the deleterious consequences of industry spurred the formation of wildlife and ecological organizations in an attempt to reverse the dangerous trends, while by 1880, modern conservationists began lobbying congressional and state legislators, leading Congress to set aside millions of acres of land as protected state and national parks for the preservation of nature. While in 1899, the Rivers and Harbors Act prohibited the dumping of waste in the nation's harbors, canals, lakes, and rivers, making the Industrial Revolution in America a monumental turning point in the history of modern man. And there you have it, the American Industrial Revolution, today in the Daily Dose. Today's Daily Dose documentary is brought to you by PlatosPeach.com, a lesson planning tool leveraging content like this and much more for educators and homeschooling parents. Check out the description for more information so that you too can teach something new every day.